In this video, we will look at the scientific method, what it is, how it works, and some of its features. We will then look at some features of non-scientific claims. The scientific method is a process that we use to work out what is true and what is false. The more we do this, the better we understand the world we live in. So how does it work? It begins with an observation and then a question. Kids are good at this. At that age, the world is full of wonder, and they seem to question everything. What is this? How does that work? Why is the sky blue? So we see something interesting and form a question on it. Then what? Then we make a guess. Again, kids are good at this. They come up with wonderful guesses. The sky is blue because it's made of water. We will look at what makes a guess good or bad later on. But for now, let's move on to the next step. We take the guess, come up with a test, and then test it. We work out what we should expect to see if it is true and what to expect if it is false. And of course, we make sure the test is fair. Then what? We take the test results and analyze them. Did we do the test properly? And what can we learn from it? This forms our conclusion. But it doesn't stop there, because this process is a cycle that repeats. We carry on observing. We look at previous conclusions as well as the world around us, and go through this process again and again. This is important. It never ends. Now let's look at some of the features of this method. It is cyclical. It might feel like it ends with the conclusion, but really, this conclusion only demonstrates our current understanding. It might be replaced in the future with a better one. For example, our ancestors used to think that the sun, the planets, and the stars all orbit the Earth. This conclusion stood for thousands of years, but it did eventually change. The next feature is clarity. There is no ambiguity or vagueness in either the guess or the conclusion. It should be clear and obvious. The next feature, falsifiable. The guess should be falsifiable. It is important to realize that this does not mean whether something is false, only whether it could be shown to be false. For example, you might have a guess that all flamingos are pink. This is falsifiable, because if you found a blue flamingo, you could then show that the guess was false. Now this feature is important because if the guess is not falsifiable, then there is no point testing it. The next feature, testable. The guess should be testable. There should be a way to properly test the guess. Otherwise, we cannot get to the conclusion. We cannot say it is true or false. Now, it may be that testing the guess is difficult. We may not have the time or money to do it now, but this might change in the future. In this case, we have paused the process, and it will take longer to complete the cycle. Now let's look at some features of non-scientific statements. Non-scientific statements can come from a fixed mindset. For example, when you cannot ask questions, cannot question conclusions. This is a problem because it breaks the cycle of the scientific method, and so you are stuck with a conclusion and have no way to improve on it. For example, our ancestors used to believe that the sun and planets orbited the Earth. One reason they held on to this idea for so long was that questioning it was not allowed. Anyone that tried was killed. Non-scientific statements can be vague. This lack of clarity, or fluffiness, allows it to have different meanings to different people or at different times. Astrologers and fortune tellers make use of this. For example, they might say, "You will face a setback." This is vague because it is not clear what constitutes a setback or when it might happen. The astrologer uses vagueness to make their guess fit a future event. If a guess is vague, How can you properly test it? You cannot, and so you cannot say it is either true or false. Non-scientific statements might not be falsifiable. The statement is worded such that it cannot be shown to be false. Again, astrologers are good with this. Consider the same statement. You will face a setback. The vagueness also makes it not falsifiable. Without knowing what constitutes a setback or how long to wait for it to happen, you cannot show that it is false. If it is not falsifiable, it cannot be tested, and so you cannot form a conclusion from it. Don't fall down the following trap. If you cannot show that it is false, then it must be true. Remember, the reason you cannot show that it is false is because it is not falsifiable. If it is not falsifiable, it is not scientific, so treat it as such. Here is another example. All dogs will die eventually. Is this falsifiable? Can you come up with a way to test it? In this video, we have looked at what the scientific method is and how it works. We also looked at some features of this method: cyclical, clear, falsifiable, and testable. And finally, we looked at some features of non-scientific statements. Hopefully now, you are better placed to spot non-scientific statements and improve the way you think.